Hey, Tati here, and welcome to Calmly Coping. Today, I am here with Lia Garvin. She is the author of the book Unstuck. She is also a speaker and an organizational consultant. And I'm super excited to have her here so we can talk more about how to get unstuck in your life, how to reframe some of your thinking patterns. So it's super great to have you here, Lia. Can you tell us more about yourself and what got you into this line of work?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Where do I start? I've spent the majority of my career working in tech as a non-engineer working in tech in program management and team operations kinds of roles. And um I think part of being um underrepresented in a number of ways, not coming from that computer science background, being one of few women in the teams and meetings and situations I was in. Um, I wrestled a lot with feeling like I belonged or deserved to be there, or really like how do I even make an impact and stand out? And meanwhile, in a program management and operations role, it's kind of often seen as like a behind the scenes kind of role. So that played a role in it as well. And but over time, I started to figure out, okay, well, how do I, tools for, how do I communicate, the value that I bring and where were places that I was getting stuck versus not. And over time I started doing more mentoring and coaching and learned that, hey, a lot of the other women I was engaging with have felt the same things. And people were really struggling with the exact same issues. And and I finally said, well, let me write some of this down and really map out, well, what are the patterns that I'm seeing that people keep falling into that are making our experience in tech or in the corporate world feel so much harder and feel like so much more of, a struggle or frustrating, or like we just aren't moving at the speed we know we could be. And that's really what sort of started writing my book Unstuck. And what's been really my passion around helping, give individuals, but also teams and managers and organizations broadly the tools to help everybody be successful in their jobs. And sometimes that starts with what are the systems and tools and processes, since I do have that program and operations background. But always really connecting the dots for folks of why when we know how to get things done, we actually feel a greater sense of well-being. We feel a little bit more calmness and control, and we know how to be successful. So I think um, my book is really about reframing your perspective, looking at a challenge through a new looking at a challenge through another perspective, another light. And I also do a lot of reframing of why why process and systems are so valuable, especially if they're done in an inclusive and pretty lightweight way.
Mhm. Yeah, and I love how your own experience and like you said, the patterns that you noticed informed the way that then
Mhm.
you not only structure the book, but also help women to overcome those struggles. And I think that it's really common, in what you described in those different areas where people tend to get stuck. But I think there can be um, a stigma or shame around like acknowledging or talking about it,
Yeah.
especially because you talked a lot about like women in the workplace. So I could imagine, especially working in a male dominated field, how that might be challenging to say that you're struggling or to admit that you might be having these places where you're getting stuck. Is that something that you've noticed in the women that you've worked with or yourself personally?
Yeah, great point. I mean, absolutely. I think there's when I talk about things like imposter syndrome or the imposter experience, I think a lot of times I always caveat, well, it's twofold because yes, we might feel like we're faking it, and I often talk about that. We're our harshest critic, and most of the time, actually, everybody's really just focused on themselves. And there is hyper scrutiny and hyper vigilance around the work of women and people in underrepresented backgrounds, and sometimes there is more attention on that, or you feel like you do have to, bring more to the table to get the same sort of, credit or acknowledgement or visibility, or you have to push twice as hard, right? Work twice as fast. And so I think what I talk about a lot and what I've experienced a lot is the existence of these biases and double standards, that are present, and as we're pushing against those, also looking at where we're adding to that in our own the way we're perceiving, what we can and can't do or should or shouldn't do. And so I think, yeah, in these situations, we can start to believe we, can't go after this promotion or this project or this job or ask for this number in our negotiation because of these sort of beliefs that we've been socialized to believe or been prescribed to us. And a lot of what I help people think about is those things are all present. How else can we look at it? Like, what else might be true? And so I think by showing women other people are experiencing this, I think a lot of times, as you called out, when you're only one of one or a few people that look like you in a situation, you think, gosh, I must be the only person experiencing this. And then you do sort of keep it quiet, or you think, okay, that's just me. I'm the only one that's dealing with this, feeling stuck in this way. But the more visibility you bring to it, you see, oh, okay, this is a common experience. And I actually have a network, a community of folks that are going through the same thing, and we can both support each other and help amplify each other so that we are breaking through this and pushing against it.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's such a powerful observation, and you touched on imposter syndrome there.
Yeah.
And one thing that I've learned is that imposter syndrome can even be something that people in like high level positions or
Yeah.
with a lot of experience still struggle with. And so, what is your insight on what occurs when somebody is struggling with imposter syndrome and how they can maybe reframe their thinking or change their perspective in order to work through that?
Yeah. It's such a great point. And it's unfortunately, it's not one of those things that goes away the more senior you get, as you called out. I think it's way more tied to when we're outside of our comfort zone or when something's new,
Mhm,
which frankly, as you rise through the ranks, maybe happens more and more. And so I think it can be frustrating to say, well, hey, I've achieved all the success. Why am I still feeling this way? Like I should be
mhm,
okay now. And I think first it's acknowledging, hey, this is not because I'm not good enough. It's because this situation is new. It's
mm,
because I'm in a new area and I'm in a learning mode, which typically is a little bit uncomfortable when I used to be an expert in something or the best or, really know that area. And so I think the first perspective shift is instead of thinking it's something about me and my value, my worth, and my competence, that it's about the situation. So when we're reframing, it's always about taking yourself outside of the middle of that because these things are rarely, maybe never. I don't know. I don't want to say like
mhm,
about us who we are as a person. They're always about the situation. And so the first thing is recognizing this is new. Then the next thing, speaking of being in the center, is recognizing the connection between the imposter experience and the ego.
mhm,
And, when we think about ego, it's not only, oh, I think I'm the greatest person ever. It's that thinking I'm in the center of everyone else's thoughts, of every interaction. And I think the ego is really present in imposter experience because it thinks everybody's watching us, waiting for us to mess up. "Oh, I said that one thing. People are probably talking about it later or whatever. And the reality is, in general, people are all thinking about themselves and what they said and their own career advancement. And people are typically thinking about us way, way, way less than
mhm,
we, give them credit for. And oftentimes something that we hang on to and beat ourselves up over and think, "Oh god, like I'll never be able to recover from that." Someone else never thought about again. And or, didn't think about it in that extreme like severity of whatever the thing that happened. And so the second reframe is around the imposter experiences, remembering that you're not at the center of the universe, that everybody's at the center of their own universe. And a thing of like everybody's watching me hanging on to every word is not as it's not happening to the degree that your inner critic is probably telling you. Um, and then again, as we said, I will caveat that there is often that hypervigilance around, people making mistakes or recency bias around things. So to be present of that as well. And I think, you know, unfortunately in the workplace, we can be subject to some people are like kind of waiting for you to mess up. And so I think that's why it becomes really complicated. But the more um, even with that being present, that may also not be true all the time, and so if we're believing it's true, we've kinda added even more volume to what we think we're being sort of watched and checked up on, and that can just be really cognitively exhausting.
mhm. Yeah, I like those reframes that you pointed out with, like, especially with the ego, that there is that tendency to think that, like, everybody is focusing on us. And I even noticed this in my clients that I work with that have social anxiety or sometimes
Yeah.
anxiety in general. There can be that tendency to focus on the negative and make assumptions about
Yeah.
everybody's judging them or criticizing them. And, I would imagine with what you're describing, it feels more high stakes when you're getting to the point where it's feels like there's so much riding on it, where,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, kind of hyper focusing on those mistakes. Or, I know that this is something that comes up a lot for my listeners as well. And that heard you or read that you mentioned in the book about like perfectionism
Yeah.
and getting in this place of like everything needs to be perfect. And I'm curious what your perspective is on that. If that imposter syndrome can kind of turn into having super high expectations and then expecting everything to be perfect, and then what that can result in, and what how to
Yeah.
deal with those types of thinking.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the perfectionism of I think that can be born out of a lot of times through our upbringing we're praised for, doing a good job, being a good student, having everything right, looking a certain way, all these things that start to create this belief that everything has to be perfect. Or if it's not perfect, like you said, the stakes are so high because I need to prove myself, and I need to really stand out. And it's gonna be harder, so it's gotta be perfect, and all of this starts to create an extreme amount of pressure that can really chip away at our confidence, and it can also really make us afraid of mistakes and failure. And I think it's like sort of we all understand on the surface that making mistakes, failure, yes, it's important, it's good for learning, but when it happens, oh my god, it can be devastating, right? It can make us think, "I can't ever try again." And so I think the consequence of perfectionism, of believing that there's a perfect one way that if only this, it'll finally show them. And this is kind of about, again, bringing it to like your own identity and self worth, is that, it's typically an unattainable standard that we've set that isn't even one possible. Second, it's probably something that's way past what someone else even wanted, or we've decided we know what the standard is without actually validating that. And then 2, we're 2, 3, whatever, we're
Mhm.
we are, we're determining that there's only one way to be successful in a situation, and that's also not typically the case. And I think, and that can create us to work in a way that's not authentic to ourselves, chase after goals or career paths or titles or different things that maybe we get there and it's not fulfilling. It didn't sort of get us that, feeling like of accomplishment that we thought we would. I think when we sort of chase after goals out of perfectionism and proving ourselves, a lot of times there can be a real letdown after landing that. Like, I thought this would be the thing. And it's because we're focused on this destination, this extrinsic thing, as opposed to, um, it's like cliche to say it's not the destination, it's the journey,
Mhm.
but appreciating the good things that we're bringing and the value that we're adding as we go. And we're
Mhm.
saying, like, "None of that matters, it's that thing at the end that matters." And so they'll always feel like we're chasing something else. So I think with perfectionism, like I said, there's so many different things that that are born out of that create a sense of stuckness because, it's all grounded on this belief that, like, that there is this perfect thing that we could do that would, like, create this whole new path for ourselves. And I think that's a fallacy to get away from, which will be really freeing because it shows us, "Hey, there's more here, right? There's more possibilities available."
Mhm. Yeah, I love how you described that, and even as you were talking about that, that made me think that, like, I was in that place in the past where I thought I just needed to move up the ladder when I was working for somebody else, and got
Yeah.
to the manager position and realized that, it wasn't for me, and it was more
Yeah.
the external appearance of, like, what this means, and, getting to that level. But
Yeah.
the reality of it just wasn't a right fit for me. And, I like how in the book you mentioned kind of when it comes to making those kinds of decisions, checking in with your values. And it's not just
Yeah.
about, like you mentioned, the cliche of like, it's not about the destination, it's the journey, but also identifying what it is for you personally,
Yeah.
that aligns with those choices that you're making.
Yeah. Exactly, and that is my number one strategy tip for how to, build resilience when there's setbacks, is that we know what we're doing and what our goals are based on things that are actually inherently and intrinsically important to us, as opposed to something that someone else set, right? Like these titles, the promotions, the level of hierarchy, the thing on the other end. A lot of times these extrinsic things feel really hollow when we achieve them. Yeah, they might open doors for something else, and that thing might be connected to a value, but if we don't really know why we're going after something, um, when we encounter a setback, when we get hard feedback, when someone says no, when we encounter rejection, we it's hard to recover from that because we're like, what am I even doing this for? But if we know, what are you even doing this for? Because I want to help people achieve XYZ. I want to get this message across. I want to, create opportunities for my family, whatever it is. These value centered goals show you that there are more paths to success. And I think it really hit me to like as a high achiever working in a corporate world where it's like you're surrounded by achievement and performance and reaching the next thing, and that when I was chasing all of that, um, it was like you're on autopilot towards something that you don't even really know what's at the end of the tunnel. And when I moved away from that and I said, okay, what do I want to do in the corporate world? What do I want to do in tech? I want to support other people feel like they can be successful in this challenging environment. Now there's like 1,000 different ways I could pursue that, right?
Mhm.
It could be through coaching, through mentoring, through managing, through um, driving programs. I do a lot of trainings. I help people with their performance review. How do you talk about your impact? Now I was able to do that kind of value centered goal all the time. It was like I could do it every, most of the day. I could find time to like live and work against my values, and and then I was more successful in that because it was really authentic to what was I was passionate about.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's great that you were able to recognize that. And like you said, it doesn't necessarily have to follow one path. Like
Yeah,
you realize that there are many different ways that you could do that.
yeah,
And I think another thing that I notice, and I know that you talk about this a lot, is feedback. And I know that this
yes.
comes up a lot in the workplace, and something that I experience myself and also have noticed in like my clients and listeners is that there can be it's easier a lot of times for managers or bosses to give negative feedback and to correct. And
Yeah.
I think especially when you tend to be more focused on wanting being high achieving, then you might be more sensitive to that negative feedback. And then because it's harder for people to give positive feedback, then you might feel like I'm not doing enough.
Yes.
Um, and so I know that that's something that people can struggle with is like asking for feedback when they need it or like knowing how to communicate that. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think first and foremost, we think feedback equals criticism. Like that's what we think. We're kind of like, oh, well, can I, say like the words, can I give you some feedback are like, oh my God, like this is it. It's over. Like in a relationship when someone says, can we talk? Like it's not going to be
Mhm.
good. And so I think first reframing that instinct to believe feedback is bad, but we can't do that if managers only give us bad feedback, right? Or criticisms when they share feedback. So I think first it's like asking everybody out there to be sharing, positive and, feedback, praise, appreciation, gratitude way more than we're course correcting. And I think I believe Marcus Buckingham that started Strength Finders and Clifton Strengths and all that sort of movement has said in a number of different outlets that people respond better, they grow more from that positive reinforcement. It's been studied. I think other folks might disagree with that you have to work on your weaknesses, but um there's a lot of evidence, and I think we're finding more and more people sharing why they're feeling disengaged or looking to move in this great resignation, great shift of millions of people in the workforce, that they're not feeling appreciated. So we got to be saying thank you. This was, great job on this, because very specific examples, way more than we're doing. And I think once we do that, we start to reframe what feedback is into it's information about how your work is going. Therefore, if you're only getting negative feedback, constructive feedback, it's not going well, right? So, like, we need to have a holistic picture. And I think when sharing positive feedback, I mean, you see, like, I got way louder. I'm like, love feedback. I could talk about feedback all day. When sharing positive or constructive feedback, we always want to be really specific. We want it to be actionable. We want the person to know exactly what they did that they want to reproduce or change for next time. And so, um, saying to somebody, great job, on that report, you kinda go, "Oh, good, my manager likes me," but, like, or like that thing, but I don't really know how to reproduce that. So, that kind of just saying good job general and then really, really specific critical feedback, those things are now feeling like, "Oh, well, I don't really know if I'm doing anything right," because
Mm,
good job is a little bit feels like kinda disingenuous or like, yeah, pat on the back, whatever. So, when we give positive feedback saying, great job on the report about XYZ. Specifically, the way you structured it was really clear. You drove to clear decisions, and we were able to, close on this big thing after reviewing it, right? You want to say exactly why this thing was done well, so that the person can go, oh, next time I'm going to structure my report that same way. I'm going to make sure to really highlight those different things. Otherwise, someone has no idea. Great job could be the length of it, the slide design, right?
mhm,
Like, literally anything. So we always wanna be really specific, and the more specific recognition and appreciation we give, the more people see they start reinforcing the right behaviors you wanna see, and then there's a little bit of course correcting, a little bit of fine tuning. I heard in a feedback training, I don't remember what it was from, but a couple of years ago, that we're supposed to give, like, 6 times more positive,
mm,
pieces of feedback to constructive. I think different managers have different beliefs around that, but if you think about it, maybe you start with 2 to 1, okay? Like,
mhm,
whatever, but we gotta be doing more either way, because, um, we believe feedback is bad because we only get bad constructive feedback, and usually it's not given with empathy, it's not specific, it's, "Hey, that," do better next time. That meeting, didn't run smoothly. We don't know why, or, you know, we just don't know exactly how to, make our manager happy, air quotes, when it should always be very clear. And then we know what to act on.
mm. Yeah, I love that focus on the specificity because I can see how that clarity would then allow you to have more focus and understanding as to what you're doing well rather than like the ambiguity of like then overthinking and wondering like,
Yeah.
well, what was it? And
Yeah.
I think those are great tips for how people can start giving more feedback. And I'm
Yeah.
curious, what if somebody's in a place where, like you said, they're feeling unappreciated and they are desiring more feedback? Like, is
Yes.
there a way that they can communicate that to their manager or ask for more feedback?
Yeah. So I think typically, or in many situations, I would say, we don't get that signal around the appreciation. And I think when our radar is only out for good job on this, thank you, like this one specific kind of appreciation, we may not get that a lot. But if we actually open the radar out up to be able to see, actually, there's quite a few positive signals I'm getting from your manager asking you to present that report again in another meeting, to lead a project, to mentor someone, to onboard another person, to lead a project. Actually, all of those things are pieces of feedback. They're pieces of feedback telling you you are doing the right thing, you are, doing a good job. And I always like to tell people to broaden that radar, because everybody delivers feedback in their own way. And so what your manager might think they're doing to reinforce and sort of bolster you and amplify your work, if you don't have your radar out for that, you might think, oh God, they didn't say good job. They must think I'm terrible. And yet they've done like 10 different things to show that you're doing a great job. So the biggest thing I think is that we can do immediately without even asking anybody for anything is to have more of an awareness of all the signals that you are getting. Because I would say we're typically getting so many more signals that we are on the right track than we're getting giving ourselves credit for. And we hang on often to the negative or the constructive feedback because we're kind of like programmed to do that as a species, like look for dangers, look for the negative, watch it be, try to self protection.
Mm.
And so we may not even notice that. So I think even as simple as at the end of each day or week saying, okay, what were the positive signals I received this week? You get into a mindset of having that radar, being able to notice a lot of the things that went well. Someone asking you, hey, share a little bit about that project you drove in a meeting. Wait, that's recognizing that, you are adding value and someone wants to hear from you. So I think um, it can be really small but we really wanna have our radar out for that more than we're doing. And then for asking for feedback, I think, it may or may not be comfortable for you to say this, so I'll just get that off the board off the bat, but, if you have that psychological safety with a manager, you feel comfortable having conversations saying, "Hey, I'd love to, have feedback both on what's working and what could be improved. I want to know kind of what types of things to keep reinforcing and keep doing, as well as where I can improve." So, sort of being direct and asking for that. Um, asking for the both sided can be can feel objective more than just like, I just want to hear good job. But I think that could be a way of saying, hey, I'd love to have a feedback conversation. It's really helpful for me to know what I'm doing right, along with what so that I can kind of weigh the whole situation. Right. And
Mhm.
and so you're asking for that in a real open-minded development sort of mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super powerful, and I love how you just pointed out how there may be ways that your manager shows you that you're doing well that you might not even be noticing. And that makes me think
Yeah.
of even in any relationship, maybe it's
Yes.
a parent or maybe it's a
Totally.
partner where everybody has a different way of communicating their feedback or their whatever it is they're trying to express. So
Yeah.
it may not always be in exactly the way that you might want to receive it or need to receive it, but that doesn't mean that it's not there. So I think that's
Yeah.
that's a great shift to like bring awareness to.
Yeah. It's so true. I mean, there's that book, The 5 Love Languages, right? It
Mhm.
reminds you, and then there's actually one, The 5 Languages of Appreciation, which is the same 5 love languages, spoiler alert, but but it applies it to work. And it reminds you, as you were just saying, that we typically appreciate people in the way that we like to be appreciated, but we actually want to learn the language, so to speak, of the other person on the receiving end. And so for any relationship, as you said, whether it's colleagues, friends, partners, whatever, family members, thinking to ourselves, okay, how can I appreciate and recognize this person in the way that lands best for them? Maybe I want a public thank you, and the other person just wants me to, send them a quick chat like, hey, great job on this thing. Like maybe I want to reply all, the other person doesn't. And so we want to have that land authentically. We do need to get to know what works for the other person.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's definitely a great point. And do you have any other advice or insights for anybody who's feeling stuck? I know it's kind of a general question, but any final thoughts or things for somebody who maybe whether it's in their career or personal life, like what are some first steps that you would suggest they take?
Yeah. So I think in general, when we're feeling stuck, a couple of things. We probably think we've tried everything and there's no other options. Otherwise, we wouldn't really be stuck, right? So I think first recognizing there are always other ways, even if they're like a little bit uncomfortable or something we kind of didn't want to try or whatever, to approach the situation. Like there's always more. Because really perspectives are infinite. And so I think stopping and saying, okay, I'm stuck right now and something what else might be possible? And asking ourselves that first question, what else is possible? What haven't I tried? what do I know I could try? I don't really want to, but I still could. Like
Mhm.
some of these what questions get us to thinking outside of this isn't possible because I already know why. I already know this isn't going to happen, right? So that already decided. We want to shake that and say, what else? Then the next thing is to remember that as we talked about early in this conversation, um, all of these challenges in the workplace, we can attach to them and feel like they are about us and who we are and our worth. To remember, this is about the work, this is about the situation, this is about this thing that's not me, and to try to look at it objectively. Because the truth is, when we encounter a setback, a rejection, a feeling of stuckness, it's not about us. It's not about who we are as a person. It's not about our self-worth. It's about how we've approached a situation. So, if you're in the middle of a career pivot or looking for a role and you keep not getting any hits on your resume or you keep not getting past that interview stage, how can I change my approach? What else can I try? Okay, I can restructure my resume. I can focus on different things in my cover letter. I can highlight different stories in these interviews. All of those things are objective outside of who you are as a person. It's about your approach, right? If you aren't landing this one opportunity, maybe you say, okay, I can get a mentor or a coach, or I can ask other people how they've, um, worked through this challenge, right? I can ask for support. That's a shift in your approach. And so, I always like to end with, when you're feeling stuck, it's not you, it's your approach. And then there's so much more we can try. And it's not personal. It's not like we're wrong or bad or this or that. It's like, hey, this approach needs to be fine tuned. And then so much is possible.
Mhm. Yeah, I think those are awesome tips. And just the idea of not taking it personally, because, I think when you take things personally, that you're automatically stuck because it's like, feels like this is something permanent and unfixable, and there's just something wrong with me versus, like you said, focusing on the approach, whereas you have more flexibility to look at things. And that makes me think of one other thing that you mentioned in the book that I found really helpful. Whereas we oftentimes think like, choices are very binary, like it's one or the other. And then that closes us off from more options where I think you mentioned looking at like, what else is there? What else can you do in this
Yeah.
situation?
Yeah. Exactly. And I mean, when someone says something that's rude or dismissive or is excluding you, it feels personal. And it may be personal from that standpoint. I think it's what do we add to that, right? And we can say, "Hey, this is about that person being, unaware how to, build a relationship with a colleague," right? Like, and we can sort of, but again, not to sort of like overly internalize and identify with that. I think these things can be really hard, especially when, we have invested everything in our career and in our lives. But like you said, it's, saying, okay, what else is true? What might be going on with that other person? Those things can start to free us from really, hanging on to these things for a long time. And I think it's especially true um if we struggle with things like feedback where we kind of want to avoid it, we start to, hold ourselves back from getting that information and insight into, how we could fine tune our behavior to get to that next phase in our career. So, um, yeah, asking ourselves, what else is here? How can I, bring more data into the situation? That's going to help us um, build more resilience. Like, kind of sit with the discomfort, feel fresher about that feedback, and then kind of move past it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's super helpful. And I really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us here. This was such an
Mm.
excellent conversation. So I know we talked about your book a few times, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. If people are interested in connecting with you further, how can they learn more about you?
Yeah. So, check out my website, liagarvin.com. That's where you can learn more about my coaching, consulting, order a copy of my book. You can reach out on LinkedIn, on Instagram at leah.garvin. On YouTube, I have a YouTube channel called Reframe with Leah, where I dive into a lot of these topics, giving little tips and tricks. And in the fall, I'll be launching a course on Maven around getting unstuck and accelerating your career. So definitely check that out. It's going to be really fun. It's going to be, taught real time, not webinar. So I'll
Mhm.
be there with you on your learning journey. So I'm super excited about that as well.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting. So I will definitely leave a link to all of that as well in the
Awesome.
description in the show notes. But it was great speaking with you today.
Yeah,
Thanks so
so
much
fun.
for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you.